Siman Pei Aleph halacha we'll do today Gimel and Dalet. Two very unusual halachas. Okay, the first one is Yali. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. The Achmurta. Okay, and the Ramah or the parentheses explain Pirish Ke'enei Beitzei Zachar She'Yachmoris Mashlechas Mirachama. Yachmoris is a female kosher animal. Okay, Yachmor is one of the animals listed in the Torah, and it excretes some kind of something that looks like Beitzei Zachar, like testicles, a little thing. The Gemara gives a whole description of what it really is. It's not so important for us right now. It's some kind of excretes this thing out of its body. And then is Mutarim. They're mutter, you're allowed to eat them. And I'm going to talk together with it. That's a shilya, shachamar notzeboy, the amniotic sac that a chamar is formed inside of it, from inside the mother's stomach. Mutter, that's also mutter, the pirshah ba'almahu, that is considered a pirshah. And for today's discussion, we're going to assume, and the Bach say like this, the halacha gimel and halacha daled are both mutter because they're pirshah. Okay, in Mitzvah Hashem, and probably the next time, we'll talk about other reasons why they might be mutter. There's quite a discussion about why halacha gimel might be mutter for a different reason. But for now, we're going to say that they're both mutter because they're pirshah. Okay, pirshah, we mentioned a little beforehand, but pirshah means, the literal translation is like excrement or things that come out of the body that are waste products. When the Torah talks about karbonos, it says things like the kirba and pirshah. Okay, and it's not clear to me that pirshah over there means actually the waste or the parts of the body that create the waste. I'm not sure exactly what it means, but it means like that. There's the pasuk in Navi. It says, "There's a risi perish al pneicha and perish chayechem," a famous pasuk. Okay, so that's it's talking about. It means a waste product. Okay, now we will maybe, if we get in halacha zayin, talk about that some people use actually the shilya. We heard about this. People use placenta products from human beings. They think they have medicinal value. We'll talk about that in Zion. We'll talk about human products. But most of us don't have a dream of eating things that are pirshah. Right? I mean, pirshah is the Gemara. Shellac just told us that they're mutter. Most of us don't think of eating it. So I have a few examples before we get to our real example for today. A few examples of places where pirshah shilas come up. One of them is not a food shilah really, but we've mentioned that tefillin have to be things that are min mutter b'ficha, and there's a shilah nachronim whether you're allowed to be ma'abed oiris for tefillin with tzoyos klavim, and one of the tzadim has to be min mutter b'ficha. Well, kelev is not kosher, so one of the tzadim is because maybe it's only pirshah. Maybe we don't care that the tzoyos klavim doesn't have the din of a kelev because it's pirshah. And then a whole bunch of things that we mentioned, we learned Siman Pei Dalet, and they are the Daki Chuvitz said talked about whether insect eggs are maybe considered pirshah. We said some things about it over there that are going to be very negated today. When we talked about homeopathic remedies, we talked about deer antler and velvet, which is also something that people like to eat, which is seemingly pirshah. In halacha aleph of this siman, we said had the din of meruglayim, which people said was maybe mutter because of pirshah, wanted to start them. When we did Siman Pei Dalet, we talked about leaf miners. Leaf miners are these little, like, creatures, I don't know what you call them, that live in between the layers of a leaf, and they eat away the inside layers. And what most of us see, in the stomach, when you get a food product that has leaf miners in it, the bug is probably gone by then, but you see the trails. Okay, you see the pirshah, the excrement that it leaves behind. As it eats, on one end, it's leaving a trail behind it on the other end. That's what we usually see. We talked about it for citrus scale. There's a little, like, creatures that live on citrus fruits, and they cover themselves with a wax, and they leave some of their body behind also. And that wax, we talked about being pirshah. I'm almost done. Later in the siman, maybe in halacha hey and halacha tes, one of the tzadim why lanolin and beeswax might be mutter, that's respectively for halacha hey and halacha tes, has to do with it being pirshah. And lastly, most significantly, which is what we're talking about today, is one of Moshe's reasons to say that shellac is mutter is because shellac, we've talked about this also at the end of Siman Pei Dalet, a drop, but one of the reasons why it be mutter, shellac is otherwise known as resinous glaze or confectioner's glaze. One of its sudden to be mutter is because it might be pirshah. Okay, so that's the most, like I think the most common thing we eat because we think it's pirshah is shellac. So we talked about it a drop at the end of Siman Pei Dalet, and we said we talk about it here. So here we are. Okay, what is shellac? Okay, so this is where the video would have been fun. So I'm sorry the video didn't make it. Okay, so shellac. This company, Mantros Hauser, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, describes shellac as the millions and millions of these little tiny insects climb onto these trees. And these trees are actually called lac trees because that's where these bugs hang out. And they give off. What happens is these insects stay on the tree and give birth, and they suck away at the resin, the sap from this tree, and that's all they do. There's a word, I forgot what they call it. Like the drink of death. I don't know what they call it. They just drink away. They just keep on working. All they do is suck away at the sap and produce this secretion, what would eventually become shellac. And that secretion, the point of that secretion is that it protects their larvae, or their young that they gave birth to. It protects them on the tree until they're grown up enough to get out. I guess it protects them from being eaten and the elements. And what people do is, who want to get shellac, they harvest it off these trees. They scrape it off. That would have been the video, would have been the fun part. They take it off the trees, they grind it up, and they this, that, and the other thing, and it turns into what we call shellac. Okay, for hundreds of years. Okay, it's only recent that people use it for food. For years, it was used to polishing wood, for wallpaper, for printing inks, for floor polishes, all kinds of ways that you could think of a hard, waxy substance being used. That's how it was used. More recently, we use it nowadays in food. It gives like a shiny cover, like for chocolates and sprinkles and
Apples.
Apples? Okay. Yes, fruits have shellac on them also, yes. It's one of the ways you coat fruits also. Okay. So, the shiloh is Yisra Moshe, whether shellac is mutter. Seemingly, it's coming from a bug, and that's what it is. This bug sits there producing this stuff day and night. That's what it does. So, shiloh whether it should be mutter. So, his first thought, which is not really our shiloh for now, is that maybe it should be mutter because we're going to see at the end of the simon, when it talks about honey being mutter. So there's a shiloh there, it's a shiloh in the Gemara, where the dvash tzirin is mutter. What happens to the honey of other animals, not bees, honey from other bugs, is that also mutter or not? And it's a machlekes. We'll see at the end of the simon, it's a machlekes. It's machlekes in the Gemara whether it's mutter or not. And Ramesh wants to say that even those who are machmer to say that dvash tzirin is usher, they only say that because the name, this is how Ramesh learns, the name dvash tzirin includes within it the name of the bug. Okay, it's called dvash tzirin, the dvash of the tzira, of that insect. It's not a bug, of that insect. But if you have something that doesn't have the name of the insect in it, it's called shellac, which doesn't have the name of the insect in it. Ramesh would say even the
dvash is mutter, but if you have the name of the...
What?
Dvash shellac is mutter, like everybody else.
Right, correct. Right. But the only ones that are also, he understands that the tzaddik one that should be also is only because it has the name of the thing to it also.
That's right.
No, that's right. So that's how we learn. That's how we're machalik, and he explains why that should be. He said he's not convinced. It's starting to think that he's not right, so he's not willing to be mikvah just because of that. But he thinks that now. Just I'll mention it because whenever you see this part of Moshe, people say, well, that's not true because the reason why it's called shellac is because the secretion is made primarily by the female bugs. Okay, and they think that shellac is a contraction of the word she-lac. Okay, she as in female, lac, it comes from the female lac bug. Okay, but that's really not the truth. Really, it's a word from it's a word from I don't know how to pronounce this. Sanskrit. Okay, that's the language of the people speaking Thailand or wherever that place. And really, the word lac or lac means 100,000. Okay, which refers to the extent of how many zillions of bugs you need to produce this stuff. Okay, so the shellac is not an English. It's an English version of this word. It doesn't really mean shellac.
Reference to the bug, but only in the number, not
right. It has nothing to do with shellac as in hundreds of thousands. I mean, that's just what we call the thing that comes from those hundreds of thousands of bugs.
Right, obviously, right. I mean, to do the Torah, 100 times mechitz in a different language, you have the same halacha.
So what should you do? So what is in the Lashon Kodesh?
Who says it? I don't know. We don't know.
So what should we call it? So
let's make it different. When we read the Torah, if it's called dvash tzirin,
but the Torah calls it dvash tzirin. Is that what the Torah calls it? No, there's no pasuk. It's not. We're not going to open up Sefer Yoel and find it's talking about dvash tzirin.
Because the term with Lashon Kodesh doesn't have another name, and therefore we are mucher to call it dvash.
I'm not sure. It's a fair question. I'm not sure what the answer is. So maybe
even that's a separate system, a different lashon, which is like the Ran says in the Takonas Kodim or whatever different shatim, right? Mechatesi would apply this.
Okay, it's a fair question. I mean, what you're really saying is maybe when the Gemara calls it Dvash Sirin is because since there's no real name for it, it doesn't have a real name.
Right.
It doesn't exist. So we just call it the Dvash of those bugs. How goofy we call this Dvash lacking also. Maybe we call it also. Okay, that's a fair question.
Yeah.
Okay, Ramesh, that's not his ikar reason. Okay, that's his beginning reason why he thinks it's hair that. But his real reason to say, his main reason to say it is because he says it's pirshah. Okay, which is why we're talking about it. But he says that it's pirshah. Okay, and he says like this: these same people, nobody here. Okay, say that when what happens is the insect sucks out the sap and it excretes it from its body. It gets enzymatically digested in its body, which is exactly like the shiloh. It's really exactly like the shiloh of the Gemara about honey, whether being enzymatically digested, processed by the body is considered to be yotzei from the animal or not. That's the exact same shiloh. And then it excretes it, and when it gives it off, it hardens. Okay, it becomes a hard shell-like covering after it leaves the body. Okay, and Ramesh describes it the same way, and he says it's in the skasha case. Ramesh says it's considered pirshah because it's not an article. It leaves the body and turns into an eitz, like we use it for furniture polish. Okay, it turns into like a hard rock, inedible item. Ramesh throws in that it's people tell him that it's not digestible. Okay, the body doesn't digest it. Well, it's not a food item. He throws it in also. He says so. It's not an article. Now, what Ramesh wants to get out of it is not if this Ramesh makes a point. And this is what we talked about in Pedal. If it would just be not royal achila, if we would just say this is not royal achila, then the din would be is like this. The din of not royal achila means that if you find a food use for it, then it is usher. Okay, and we talked about it then, that carmine, which comes from the bug, which is not really royal achila, but it becomes royal. If you have a food use for it, it is usher. As opposed to, when something is a yotzei, when something is a pirshah, one of the rules is that when a yotzei is usher, pirshah is mutter. Even if later you find the food use for it, it's too late, it's over. And once it was designated as being pirshah, then the fact that it would become edible later on doesn't make a difference. So once it mentions it's not a food item, so it's over. The fact that later on we figure out how to put it onto shiny candy doesn't make a difference. Okay, it's a big difference between pirshah and regular. When you grind up carmine, when you grind the actual bugs themselves, there, if we find the food, after we dry them, if we find the food use of them, they're usher. Okay, they became not edible, and they're back to being edible. But pirshah is not like that. Pirshah, once it becomes not edible, it's over. We're going to talk about why that should be in a second.
You're saying that the Lashon with respect to carmine would have been v'lo havei royal achila, as opposed to here v'lo hayadav ochel. Moshe means to say this is pirshah b'yal.
Right, he says it. He says this, but he makes this point. Yes, and he makes this point that when something is pirshah, at the point when we say it became not edible, when it's not edible, it can never come back to being usher. As opposed to the carmine, he doesn't say carmine. He says something else.
When Moshe says v'lo hayadav ochel, what he means to say is that it's pirshah.
Mm-hmm. No, he says it's pirshah. Yeah, I didn't put that word up there. I was just trying to show. I mean, it's exactly how they describe the same thing. You know that turns into edible. Yes, you're correct. Okay. That thing we talked about this last Pesach. We talked about Nishtana. Okay, but Nishtana and all the din of Nishtana. That there's such a rule that when something is a yotzei, if something is an isser and it becomes inedible, stays isser. If something is a yotzei and it becomes inedible, then it's over and it'll never become back. So again, it comes from a Gemara tomorrow about the chicken of a trifling eggs.
You mean a pirshah?
Did I say yotzei?
Yeah, it's
I mean, well, a pirshah that becomes inedible is over. It's finished. It doesn't come back to
the new thing now. It's a continuation.
Yes, continuation. Just finishing that up. Okay, so now this is what Moshe says, and all the national American Hashgachos follow what Moshe says. Okay? By and large, they follow it. A lot of the Hasidic Hechsherim don't follow it, and the Eretz Yisrael Hechsherim don't follow it, and that's why you'll see on some of what they call the Hamisha candies. Yes, correct. On some of the Hamisha candies, you'll see it says that no confectioner's glaze. Okay, because they want to tell you we don't use that thing that the national hashgachos use. We don't use it. So they'll say in big letters, and they're told they don't use it. Okay, so what's the reason why? What's the reason why? I'll tell you what I think the reason is. Rabbi Yasha has a truth about it, and he talks about I don't think he quotes Ramosha by name. I don't think so, but he's talking about what Ramosha says. That should be pirshah, and he says he asks a kasha. he says, when we say that something's pirshah, let's say we have, I told you before, there's a shayla that tzoyas klovin, maybe that should be pirshah. Or maybe yalei dachmurtu or shilya for chamor. It means is we have something that's an edible item. We have a chamor, or a yachmor, or we have a keleb. Okay, these are regular, so to speak, food, they're edible items. And now, the thing that comes out of them, if what comes out of them is milk, that's edible also. If what comes out of them is not edible, then we say, oh, it's on a lower darga. It's not the same as the edible item. This is a lower level, and that's considered pirshah, and it's mutter. He says, but that's only true when we have something that the thing itself follows the regular rules. The regular rules of Torah are only edible things are asr. So a keleb is asr, and the toyas klavim could be mutter. But what happens if we start with a bug? Bugs are be'etzim not edible. And the Torah ava pikein asr them. So it means that the Torah is telling us when it comes to bugs, don't follow the rule that says things that are inedible are mutter. No, the Torah tells us specifically it's asr even though it's not edible. It's still asr. So the fact that the thing that came out of it is not edible, what's the difference?
Bugs are not edible.
Well, we see, there are dinim in Kufdal, is it? That they're not considered, the next time of Gam, they're not considered to be pleasant tasting. So you're making an assumption. You're right, you could say there are bugs, there are actually bugs that actually taste good.
Gam is a different thing than they're not edible, right?
They're what? Right, that's true. It's true. But he's works with an assumption that they're just not edible. You're right. You could argue from that side. It's true, you could argue from that side.
Bugs in like Korea and stuff.
Right, there are funny things, yes, we talked about when we talked about the bug eggs. Yeah, people eat them. Okay, but Aruch says that they're not royal and alpha peking the Russian anyhow. And in Cain, how do we know that the pirshah of a bug has that thing? All the examples of pirshah, Rambam has many examples, there's a bunch of Gemaras about it, all of them are talking about regular pirshah from animals. But how do we know such a thing as a pirshah from a bug should be also? And when we talked about it in Peidalin, we talked about whether the eggs of a bug should be mutter, whether they should be yotzi also. We said the same thing, which was to say, we had a shiloh there. I'll say it quickly. We had a shiloh there, which was like this. If I forgot who answered shiloh. One of the early Acharonim answered shiloh. He says the din of a sheretz aretz is it's not usher till it walks on the ground. He says, why? How could that be? The Torah says it's not usher till it walks on the ground, but how could that be? Every sheretz came from his mother. Well, when the mother laid the egg, that egg was a yotzi. Well, if the egg was a yotzi, then the new ant that formed from that egg is a yotzi from the mother. So let it not be usher. Okay, I'm not usher because I was never sheretz, but the mother was sheretz. Once the mother was sheretz, the child should be considered the yotzi from the mother, and also even without being sheretz. So how can the Torah say that bugs are only usher when they're sheretz? As soon as the first one was sheretz, all the future generations are all usher because they're all the yotzi of the first one that was sheretz. That was the kashrus we answered, and Rafal answered over there. That the answer is because the Gemara says by eggs, the baitza of a treifa. A chick born from an egg from a treifa mother is mutter. The Gemara says because as the egg develops from an egg into a chick, it disintegrates. It's masriach. The Gemara says it falls up. It reconstitutes itself into these inedible parts and becomes back edible. He says that the bug eggs do the same thing. I'm saying this very quickly. We said it over there also. And when we said that, and therefore he says, so the bug eggs are also like cut off from the mother because they're masriach. So at that time, we mentioned that Zalman Chimik Goldberg asked on that. He says, who told you to do it by bugs? Maybe by bugs there's no such thing as being masriach. Doesn't mean anything. And Rav Shafta asked the same question. So they both asked that question. Okay? And so the same question Rav Yashav is asking is that how do we know that by bugs is such a heter to say that when it was masriach, when it became not edible, it became mutter, and it's considered a pirshah? Okay? So for the other side, we have Rafal's question, which is a serious question. Dr. brings a whole bunch of people who talk about being makel on bug eggs for exactly this reason, because they're pirshah. Again, he's talking about bug eggs, the same shiloh. And so we have these two tzadim. Okay, so we're going to have to try. We're going to see if we can understand what's the machlokes over here. What's going on over here? Why do some people say that from the bugs? What Ramosh is saying is, even if it's a pirshah from an inedible item, it's still mutter. And they're saying that, well, pirshah only makes a difference. Being inedible only makes a difference if becoming something that the parent, was edible itself. If the parent itself wasn't edible, who cares if the child is edible? Okay, so I'm going to tell you what I think, but I'm going to tell you when we finish that I'm not really 100% convinced that I'm right. Okay, so I'll tell you what I think. There's a big question. I'm going to leave you with a question at the end. Okay, and to start, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to paraphrase a shiloh to Chavos Datzisk. Chavos Datzisk on our din asks a shiloh. I'm going to not say it exactly his way, but I'm going to paraphrase his question. the Gemara says that when the Gemara says Yali de Yachmurta, okay, the Gemara doesn't say why it's mutter. Okay, that first case, the Gemara doesn't say why. The Beis Yosef says that the Gemara says it's pirshah, and I can't see it. I don't see we got it from the Gemara, but that's the Beis Yosef. The Gemara doesn't say why; it just says it's mutter. Shulya, the second case, the halacha daled, by the case of Shulya, the Gemara says that it's mutter because it's pirshah. And that Gemara is the only Gemara in Kashrus, which is this whole dinim of Yotzei and Hatami, the few plot over there of Yotzei. The only time the Gemara talks about something being mutter because of pirshah is this Shulya Shachachamor Ner Tziboy. Okay, that's the only example of pirshah. When the Gemara says, is it really pirshah? The Gemara says, is it really pirshah? The Gemara says it's totally on the following clear. If a chamar has a Shulya, if a person has a shulya, is it metame tumas mace? Is that shulya metame tumas mace? The parent died. Is the shulya metame tumas mace? Do we say that the shulya is part of the mother, or is the shulya not part of the mother? Whether it's metame tumas mace. So the Chavetz says, he says, who cares? What on earth does being metame tumas mace have anything to do with this? What is it? The Gemara goes back and forth whether it is or is not metame tumas mace. Is it part of the mother or it's not part of the mother? Who cares? Well, let's say, ask me, is the shulya edible or not edible? I get that. That's what I'm expecting to hear. Is the shulya an edible thing or is it not edible thing? What in the world is the Gemara talking about? Whether the shulya is considered part of the mother or not part of the mother in tumas mace? If you would have told me in tumas oichlin, there's another thing. Shulya has a din in hilchos tumas oichlin. Is it metame tumas oichlin? Is it considered oichel or not? So we would have understood that. We would say, okay, is it an oichel or is it not an oichel? We would get that. The Targets a din about that. Is it considered an oichel? But you want to know if it's metame tumas mace because the mother would died? Is it part of the mother? What does that have to do with anything? Why on earth does the Gemara bring that? That's a Chavetz question. Okay, so that's one question. Now, to answer that, I'm going to ask you a different question that's really even more fundamental to this thing over here, which is, how do we know that pirshah is mutter? We know that yotzei is asur. And we have a regular din, which is when things are inedible, they become mutter. But like I mentioned quickly before, when they're inedible, they're temporarily mutter. A number of the Achronim talk about it for this din. They're temporarily mutter. If they become back to being edible, they're back to being asur. So, but pirshah has a special din that once it's mutter, it's over. It's mutter forever. How do you know? How do we know that there's such a thing called? That we have this new category called pirshah. We have a thing called yotzei. Who told us that there's this din of pirshah? I told you, the Gemara doesn't even talk about it. The Gemara talks about it at the very tail end of the Gemara, and the Gemara makes this dimion to tumas mace. But how do we know that? How do we know that pirshah shouldn't be the same as every other yotzei? What's the difference whether the kela gives off milk or the kela gives off tzoya? What's the difference here? Why, if the yali yachmurta gives milk, it'll be asur. So why if the yachmurta gives off this yali yachmurta, whatever they are, why shouldn't that be asur also? What's the difference? Why do they have different dinim? How do we know that there's a thing called yotzei and a thing called pirshah? Where did that come from? So to that, it seems to me that the answer is like this. Torah says that you're not allowed to eat treif items. When it says that, the Torah tells you not to eat it. It says mibasar mo'asechel. You can't eat the basar of an animal. So really what you're not allowed to eat is the basar. That's it you're not allowed to eat. So to speak, min ha-Torah. If you just read the psukim, it says don't eat the flesh. Don't pick a piece of horse meat and eat it. No horse meat is asur. We then have drushes in the Gemara that tell us that tam ki'ikar. And actually we have drushes in two stages. We have drushes of tam or umam asher, that tells us that certain types of tam are asur when there's a piece of the mam with part of the isser is there. Then we have a shaila where the tam of a loy mam asher is asur also. Another psukim to maybe we're not leaving that other things are asur also. Okay, so we got another thing that we said tam ki'ikar, that just like the ikar is asur, just like bisara is asur, bisara mosechil, the tam of the thing is also asur to eat. Because that's another stage. Our Gemaras that we're all learning about over here told us another din. Not only is the basar asur, not only is the tam of the basar asur, but even the yotzei of the basar is also the tzir or the beitza or the milk are all asur because they're also now they don't taste at all like the isser. They're removed from the isser. The isser tastes like horse's meat, and the tam of the horse meat tastes like horse meat at the first darga, and then we have another darga that the milk of a horse is also asur. Now, horse's milk doesn't taste like horses, but it's another darga. It's like a really separate thing, but it's also or eggs from a treif bird are also it's not the same as the tam of the thing. It's another stage. We have another pasuk for that. But we don't have a pasuk to tell us that when you're that much removed, we have one more stage removed. When you're not just the Yotze, you're another stage removed. We don't have a pasuk to tell us that's usher. What's the difference? The difference is, the way I understand it is, the difference between a Yotze and a pirshah is not whether they're edible or they're not edible. What the difference is that Yotze means the product of an animal. When a cow gives milk, that's a product of the cow. As opposed to the pirshah of the cow, it's not a product, it's a byproduct. Okay? In Rabbi Fishbein's father showed me, there's a sefer called Tirgem Avram. Okay? There's just a dugma of it. It's from the Rambam's son, wrote a pirush on Targum. I never heard of it before until he told me, but Rabbi Fishbein's father wrote 2 svarim on Targum, so he knew it like this. Like if it was with him, that was obvious. Of course you know that sefer. And then he said the word perish means to be separated from, or not connected to, or not part of the thing. Which is to say, so what I'm understanding is, not just from there, from a few places here, that pirshah just means instead of being a product of this item, it's a byproduct. Byproduct means to say it's like an undesirable, it's like a leftover, like you're stuck with this thing. Okay, this is what we have. So when the Torah tells us that we should answer Yotze, it told us the product not only is the animal ulcer, not only is the time of the animal ulcer, but even the things that the animal produces. The honey produces, the bee produces honey, and cows produce milk, and chickens produce eggs. All those things are also, the products of these animals are also ulcer. But the pirshah, which is to say not the product of the animal, the byproduct of the animal, the secondary, the undesirable thing, that thing is not ulcer.
So you're saying that Yotze is a totzah, and pirshah is a chelik, but it's a separated chelik.
It's a well, the etzem, even the Yotze would have been mutter. We have a chiddush.
That's the difference.
Yes.
One is a totzah, but one is part of it. It's just a separated part of it.
Okay, you could say it like that. You could say it like that. Okay.
Byproduct means.
Okay, so the
product and byproduct one that's edible?
No, so now, edible is where we would usually decide whether this is a product or a byproduct. So the way I understand it is, being edible is a siman, whether it's a product or a byproduct. It's not the seed, it's not what decides whether it's pirshah or not.
So what decides it?
Okay, so you look at the thing, when you look at the cow, you say, the milk that comes out of the cow, that's a product of the cow.
So you're saying, you only say it's a product, it's edible.
Well, so
pretend we don't know if something's edible or not. Right?
Okay, so what I mean to say is, what I'm coming to is, when we look at let's go to the case that we spoke about. When we talk about the shulya shachamor noitzabar, okay? So if in Hilchos Tumas Mace, this is considered part of the animal, the shulya is considered part of the animal for some other din, it has nothing to do with whether it's edible. It has to do with Tumas Mace, is it part of the animal? So we say, we see that the shulya is considered part of this animal. Okay, like whatever you say. And it separated itself now. But it really was part of the animal. But if in Hilchos Tumas Mace is not considered part of the animal, so it's considered a byproduct not because of whether it's edible or not. We have other ways of deciding if it's edible or not. It's a byproduct because in some other din, it's not considered part of the animal.
Okay. If I'm describing all of the animal's parts, I will also describe the pirshah. I'll say the kirbo pirshah. It's part of the entire package. It's just a separated part of the package.
Right. But if we say the shulya, if we say the Rambam, we're not going to talk about. The Rambam says he calls these kind of things. He says kishar tinofesh shebeguf. It's like not part of the body. It's like just like an extra thing that just like plopped onto it. Okay, it's not part of it. We're not going to see, but there are gemaras about if an animal swallowed something, we wouldn't say that's a yotze of the animal. That's just popped into the animal. Okay, so this is not exactly like that. It really came from the animal, but it's not the ikar of the animal. Okay, the milk we're saying it's not really the animal either, but it's close enough to the animal. We say that's considered yotze.
By the way, Tirgem Avram is the son of the Gra.
Of the Gra? I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you for correcting us. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, same thing. Almost. Okay, so there's a question. The next thing, I'm not sure which way to read this. Okay, the Briskerov in Kashrus makes a diak from the Rambam. The Rambam starts with these halachas about yotzim min hatami. He starts with this, the beginning of the paragraph. It starts like this. He says, Kol Michael yotzim min haminim, blah 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 blah. And he goes on to say what the din of those things are. So the Briskerov says he sees from there that the din of yotze only includes ma'acholim. Okay, why did I stick in that word, Kol Michael HaYotzim? Why did you say Kol HaYotzim? I mean, what's that word Michael for altogether? Well, why is it there? Because so the word Kol Michael is to tell you that the whole din of Yotzi only applies to things that are machon. The things that are not machon is what the Gemara calls pirshah, and those things are not, it's not that they're mutter because they're not royal achil, they're just not included, they're just totally not in the din. Okay? So I'm not sure if this is like what I'm saying or not what I'm saying. I mean, Lamai says he's being medayek from the word Michael, as if that's the criteria is Michael, but on the other hand, what's the reason? Why should Michael only be like that? So we're trying to give a hezbollah as to why it should be Michael. It doesn't really depend on that. Okay. So, if I'm right, I'm not convinced I'm right, but if I'm correct, then if we use the things edible as one way of measuring whether it is or is not considered yotzi or pirshah, when we come to look at a bug, okay, we don't care if in the din bugs are mutter, if they're edible or they're not edible. We're trying to judge whether the leaf miner trails, are they considered part of the leaf miner or they're not part of the leaf miner? So right now we're trying to make a judgment. Are those the excrement that are left behind? Is that part of the leaf miner or is it not part of the leaf miner? So the fact that bugs are mutter or usher when they're edible doesn't play a role. We have to just look and say, is this the thing that it creates, or is this just what the byproduct, the undesirable part of what the animal made? And of course it's undesirable. It's just as undesirable as the tzoyas klavim. It doesn't make a difference whether the parent is mutter or usher. When it's not a din, it's not trying to say, it's mutter because it's not royal achila. That's not why it's not mutter because it's not royal achila. It's mutter because it's not part of the animal. It's the pirshah of the animal. So whether the mother was royal achil or not doesn't make a difference over here. So we can judge if you look at that, there's no difference between that tzoya than from the tzoyas klavim. It's the same thing. Why is it the same thing? Because it's not a useful, edible part of the animal, not because of the din of it. It's like a shilya. Shilya, the Gemara says, it's not part of the animal because the animal's not metamic to mismace. The shilya is not metamic. In other words, we have other ways of deciding is it useful or not useful. So the fact that the parent is or is not edible, whether the parent not being edible still also doesn't make a difference. Not being edible has over here is just a way of judging whether you like the parent or not like the parent, and not so much whether it's mutter or usher. Now, the Rabbi Yashiv has two reasons for his side, two weaknesses to what I'm saying in this application. First of all, is it's harder to say that the pirshah is not as important in a bug when the bug itself was not so edible. Because how are we judging you're less edible because why? Well, what's the difference between the aphids? Aphids give off a sweet liquid. Okay, the ants eat. Okay, the ants eat. Okay, so aphids give off a sweet secretion that's edible, and leaf miners give off soya that's not edible. Why do we think one is more the product and one is not the product? Why do you think the aphid secretion is usher and this one is not? Well, it has to do with whether they're edible or not edible. But if the mother is not edible, and the mother's usher anyhow, it's harder to justify what we're saying. But more importantly is that when we come to shellac, that's what our title is about, shellac. In shellac, is it true that the shellac is not the ikar product of this animal? That's all the animal does. Its whole lifetime it sits there laying eggs and producing shellac. It's not like shellac is it's not like shellac is an undesirable byproduct of the animal. Shellac that's what these animals do. That's all they do. They sit there their whole life producing shellac. So it's not like to say, well, what do cows do? I don't know, cows do lots of things, but cows they burp, okay? And they have soya. But when we look at a cow and say, what's the useful part of the cow? We say it produces milk. Okay, well, what do shellac bugs do? Now, I'm not talking about whether you use it for furniture pods. That's not important. What do these bugs do? They make this liquid. They produce this secretion. So if the judgment is really on whether it's a usable ikar product of the animal, we would think that it really is a product of this animal. I mean, that's all the animal does. All the bug does all day is produce this stuff until it flattens.
To affect the egg. They're not doing it to
right, so you're right. They're doing it for their own reason. Guess what? Cows don't produce it so we could eat cereal and find one either.
No, they want to make food for their...
And chickens don't lay eggs so we can eat them. Chickens lay eggs to make new chickens. It's all, they have their own reason, so to speak, why they're doing it. But from our perspective, a big part of a chicken is that lays eggs. That's what we think of it. A big part of lac bugs is they produce shellac. Shellac might be for furniture powers, but then the difference, that's what they do. That's what shellac bugs do. It's like honey. Bees do lots of things. One of them is they produce honey for us. So why did I speak? Okay, anyhow, so it's a good question. Now, what's even... Okay, so that would be an explanation. No, Rabbi Yashiv doesn't say it that way. That's not how he argues it. He argues it, and he says, if the mother is not royal achila, then who cares if the pirshah of this is not royal achila? We sort of thought we got around that question, but I'm not sure if we really justified it. But more significantly is what we're not going to talk about is, because I have a possible way to explain it, I'm not convinced yet, is, I said to you, the Gemara in Kashrus only has this one example of pirshah. Okay, that's the Gemara in Kashrus, has this one example at the very tail end of the Gemara. Okay, but there's a Gemara in Chulin, in Kuf Tezayin Beis. The Gemara has a whole Amud of Gemara about, very related to our dinim, okay, about cows that drink milk, and when you open them up, we'll see about it in Halacha Vav, about cows, the milk that's inside of a cow's stomach, and making cheese out of it and things like that, and the milk itself. There are all kinds of dinim about that, a whole Amud of Gemara about that. And the end of that Gemara says that if a cow drinks milk, a regular calf drinks milk from a treifa mother, a mother who's a treifa, then the milk that's inside of there is mutter. According to most of the girsos, it's a shaila and Rishonim had a big garis, but the way our girs says it's mutter because it's pirshah. The Gemara uses the word that it's pirshah. The way our girs is it because it's pirshah. Why is it pirshah? Because either immediately when it enters the stomach or after it sits in the stomach for a while, at some point it becomes not edible. Okay, so that saying is, now listen to what we just described. The milk when it came out of the mother was plain old cow's milk. The mother was a treifa, the milk that came out was treif. And we said that now 10 minutes later, when it gets into the stomach, or at some point in the future, it becomes pirshah. So the Gemara is using pirshah to describe something that was regular plain old cow's milk, that later spoiled and became inedible, and somehow, for whatever reason, the Gemara says it, we'll see if when we get to Halacha Vav, for some reason, at some point it becomes mutter because it's pirshah. So I'm saying to you that pirshah just is a way of judging, is it a product of the animal, or what I call the byproduct of the animal? Well then, how could that happen later on? When it left the animal, it left like every other milk. The fact that a calf drank it instead of it going into a bucket doesn't make a difference. It left the cow as milk. Well, when it left the cow as milk, then we would call that yotze. So the fact that it turned inedible shouldn't make a difference. Sounds like the Gemara is saying is, pirshah really depends on whether something's edible or not edible. And therefore it could change. It could be yotze now, and in 10 minutes from now it could be pirshah.
You're talking about where the milk now went into another animal. Now, animal started adjusting it.
No, so okay, but
why are you judging from the millers? You judge it now.
The Gemara's clear is that the mother was a treifa. The milk should be treif because it came from the mother. That's what we're talking about. So if it came from the mother, is it the milk of a treifa? So had that milk gone to a bucket, the milk would be usher. The milk went into the cow, into the calf, it's mutter. So we can think of lots of reasons why it would be mutter, but the Gemara says mutter because it's pirshah. That sounds to us, it became inedible now, and therefore became mutter. Well, wait a second. If pirshah is just a way of describing, is this a desirable product or an undesirable, mistake coming out of the mother, then it shouldn't make a difference. How could we judge it?
It's not pirshah from the mother, it's pirshah from the cow.
So that's a question. It's possible to read the Gemara the way. It's not the Parshas Gemara. That's part of what I'm not clear about. The simple part of reading of the Gemara is, the Gemara is saying is, it's pirshah of the mother because it turned inedible. But,
I thought also it's pirshah of the child because now it's inside it becomes a payment.
okay, it's a question. It might be that that's correct. That's what I've a bunch of pages here that I'm not clear about. That that it might be that it could be that that's what the Gemara means to say. That's not the simple read. The simple read. There are a number of mashmos like you're saying. No. I have 2 more pages here. 3 more pages.
You find the dark tummy inside a dark tummy. You find the trade food eaten by an animal or something.
Yes.
So then, that doesn't stem with this.
So the simple difference is that a yotze has a special din. With something that comes out of another animal, if it becomes inedible, it becomes mutter forever. Something that is the etzem trait animal, as we said before, the etzem trait animal, if it's edible, it stays usher. It has a different status. One thing is
because it's yotze,
it has a lower.
Yes,
correct. So that's what the Gemara is saying. The Gemara. So we understand the Gemara. I have to say something. Rabban in Mishnah Saran, he says in Bukhari, he says that the way pirshah works is how pirshah works. He says it leaves the animal and it was edible. It became inedible later on. Okay, it's inedible. Now it becomes back to being edible. An hour later, it becomes back to being edible. He says, well, it's too late because when it became edible, it's not coming out of a treif animal. It's not a yotze anymore, because, hey, it was a yotze yesterday. Yesterday it could have been usher. But today, it's not, when it became edible, it wasn't coming out of a treif animal. He says, the bone of a kosher animal, when it becomes edible, it's usher, I'm sorry, not in Bukhari, this is in Shulchan. when the bone of a treif animal becomes edible, it's usher, not because it's a yotze, because it's a treif animal. So a treif animal is usher whenever it becomes edible, it becomes usher. But the yotze, it can only become usher when it's excreted. Well, it's not being excreted now it's just sitting in a container. So now it can't be usher. Okay? So that understanding says that yotze has to do with whether it's edible or not edible. When it becomes, it's a yotze, it becomes inedible, and once it becomes inedible, now it can't get back to being usher because it's no longer connected to the mother. Okay. We have more to think about this.